What should have been the happiest day of my life turned into a moment of shocking revelation, and justice served. As I stood there in my white dress, facing the man I thought I knew, I never imagined I would be the one to expose his darkest secrets in front of everyone we knew. But sometimes, fate has a way of forcing your hand, and betrayal demands its own form of reckoning. The morning of June 15th sparkled with promise. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Cathedral, casting rainbow patterns across the marble floors where I would soon walk down the aisle. The historic church, with its soaring Gothic spires and century-old oak doors, stood majestically in downtown Boston, a testament to enduring love and sacred vows. Or so I thought. I stood in the bridal suite, surrounded by the soft rustle of silk and the gentle murmur of my bridesmaids' voices. My best friend Rachel was carefully adjusting my veil, her expert hands smoothing out every crease in the delicate lace that had once belonged to my grandmother. The ivory dress I'd spent months selecting hugged my figure perfectly, its pearl-encrusted bodice catching the light with every breath I took. "You look absolutely stunning, Vic," Rachel whispered, her eyes meeting mine in the antique full-length mirror. She'd been by my side through everything: college, my first heartbreak, and finally meeting James 3 years ago. If only I'd listened more carefully to her subtle concerns about him back then. The suite was filled with the sweet scent of peonies and garden roses, their pale pink petals echoing the blush in my cheeks. My mother had outdone herself with the flowers, ensuring every arrangement perfectly matched the romantic vision I'd dreamed of since childhood. On the vintage vanity lay my something borrowed, my aunt's diamond bracelet, something blue, a delicate sapphire anklet, something old, my grandmother's veil, and something new, the pearl earrings James had given me last Christmas before I knew the truth about where they really came from. My younger sister Olivia bounced around the room, her excitement palpable as she snapped photos on her phone, documenting every precious moment. "The guests are starting to arrive," she announced, peeking through the curtains. "And James's family is already here. His mother's wearing that incredible emerald dress she bought in Paris." At the mention of Paris, my stomach tightened imperceptibly. If they only knew what I'd discovered about James's business trip there last month. The weight of the USB drive hidden in my bouquet suddenly felt heavier, its contents burning a hole in my consciousness. But I pushed the thought aside, determined to maintain my composure for just a little longer. My father appeared at the door, his eyes growing misty as he took in the sight of me in my wedding dress. "Princess, you look." He trailed off, emotion catching in his throat. Dad had always been my rock, the man against whom I measured all others. If he only knew how his investment in James's firm had been misused, how the man he'd trusted, with both his daughter and his money, had betrayed that trust so completely. The church bells began to toll, their deep, resonant chimes marking the hour. In 15 minutes, I would walk down that aisle, face the man I had planned to spend my life with, and change everything. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted my bouquet, feeling the hard edge of the drive nestled safely among the stems. "It's time for the final touches," Rachel announced, reaching for the delicate crystal flask of perfume, my signature scent that James had always loved. As she spritzed it gently around me, I caught sight of my reflection once more. The woman staring back at me wasn't just a bride preparing to make her vows. She was a woman preparing to take control of her own destiny. "Are you ready, sweetheart?" my mother asked, appearing at my side with a tissue already in hand, anticipating happy tears that would soon turn into something else entirely. "More ready than you know," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. The irony wasn't lost on me, how I'd spent months planning every detail of this wedding, only to now be planning its spectacular demolition. Through the walls, I could hear the organist beginning the prelude, the familiar notes of Bach floating. through the air like a bittersweet reminder of all the dreams that would soon shatter. But as my bridesmaids lined up in their dusty rose gowns, their faces glowing with happiness for me, I knew that what I was about to do wasn't just for my own sake. It was for everyone who had ever been deceived by the charming facade of James Preston III. The moments before a wedding are supposed to be filled with butterflies of excitement, not the leaden weight of revenge. As Rachel helped me with my final preparations, I caught myself staring at my phone, at the last message I'd received from Sarah, James's business associate from London. The message that had started this whole unraveling 3 days ago. I thought you should know. It had begun and ended with attachments that made my world collapse. The proof was irrefutable. Bank statements, hotel receipts, photographs, and emails that painted a picture so different from the man I thought I was marrying that it felt like a surreal nightmare. But the nightmare was real, and James's perfectly crafted image of a successful, faithful entrepreneur was nothing but an elaborate lie. My father knocked on the door again, this time with the wedding coordinator, Marina, hovering anxiously behind him. 5 minutes until we start, Miss Preston-to-be, she announced with practiced cheerfulness. The irony of that title made my stomach turn. If she only knew that in less than an hour, the name Preston would be synonymous with scandal in Boston's elite social circles. Rachel sensed my tension, misinterpreting it as normal pre-wedding jitters. Hey, she whispered, adjusting my veil one last time. You've got this. Just think about the honeymoon. 2 weeks in the Maldives, just you and James. The Maldives. Another bitter pill to swallow. The luxury resort he'd booked, or claimed to have booked, had been paid for with money that wasn't his to spend. My father's investment, meant to expand James's technology firm, had instead funded a lifestyle of deception that spanned 3 continents. The bridesmaids were now gathering their bouquets, their excitement filling the room with a buzz of anticipation. My sister Olivia couldn't stop grinning as she checked her lipstick one last time. I can't believe my big sister's getting married, and to James Preston. Mom's still pinching herself that you're marrying into the Preston family. The Preston family. Old money, old connections, old secrets. James's mother, Caroline, had welcomed me with open arms, declaring me the perfect addition to their dynasty. Would she be so welcoming when she discovered how her son had been stealing from investors, including his own father-in-law-to-be, to cover his gambling debts and fund his double life? Marina appeared again, clipboard clutched to her chest. Places. Everyone. The guests are seated, and the groom is at the altar. She beamed at me. Mr. Preston looks so handsome in his tuxedo. You're such a lucky bride. Lucky. I caught my reflection in the mirror one last time. The woman staring back at me wore the perfect mask of bridal serenity, but underneath, she was steel and fire. The USB drive in my bouquet contained not just evidence of James's financial fraud, but proof of everything else. The other women, the secret accounts, the web of lies he'd woven while playing the role of devoted fiancé. The first notes of the bridal chorus began to float through the air. My bridesmaids lined up in their practiced order, ready to proceed down the aisle. This was it. The point of no return. Ready, princess? My father asked, offering his arm. His proud smile made my heart ache. He had no idea that in trying to protect me from the truth about James, he'd given me the strength to expose it instead. I've never been more ready, Dad, I replied, taking his arm. The weight of the USB drive pressed against my palm through the bouquet stems, a small but powerful reminder of what needed to be done. As the doors to the main chapel began to open, I took one last deep breath. The faces of 300 guests would soon turn to watch me walk down the aisle, expecting to witness a fairy tale wedding. Instead, they would see something far more memorable. The moment a bride chose truth over tradition, justice over romance, and strength over silence. Outside the bridal suite, the cathedral hummed with anticipation. Marina, our wedding coordinator, rushed past with her ever-present headset, directing late-arriving guests to their seats. Through the heavy wooden door, I could hear the murmur of conversations, the rustle of programs, and the subtle shifting of 300 people waiting to witness what they thought would be the society wedding of the year. "Your makeup is perfect," Rachel said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Though I still think we should have gone with the darker shade for your lips." She was stalling, I knew. My best friend since college had always been able to read my moods, and something about my calm demeanor must have seemed off to her. I caught her studying my face in the mirror, concern flickering behind her professional bridesmaid smile. If only I could tell her everything. About the late-night email that had appeared in my inbox 3 days ago, about the hours I'd spent verifying its contents, about the choice I'd made yesterday while everyone else was at the rehearsal dinner. But I couldn't risk it. Not yet. "The flowers arrived from the conservatory," Olivia announced, bouncing back into the room with my bridal bouquet. White peonies, cream roses, and delicate stephanotis blooms cascaded in a perfect waterfall, concealing the small USB drive I'd carefully woven into the stems that morning. "James's mother is already telling everyone how much they cost. Did you know they flew them in from Holland?" Of course they had. The Prestons never missed an opportunity to flaunt their wealth. Wealth that, as I'd recently discovered, wasn't entirely their own. The familiar surge of anger rose in my chest, but I pushed it down. There would be time for that later. My mother appeared in the doorway, elegant in her mother-of-the-bride outfit that had cost more than my first car. "Victoria, darling, James sent this for you." She held out a small velvet box, her eyes sparkling with tears of joy. "He said it's been in his family for generations." With steady hands, I opened the box to reveal a stunning sapphire pendant. The stones winked at me. In the bright dressing room lights, as blue as the waters of Lake Como where James claimed he'd first realized he loved me. Another lie, as it turned out. He'd been in Lake Como all right, but not alone, and not thinking of me. "Here, let me help you put it on," my mother offered, already reaching for the clasp. "No," I said, too sharply. Everyone in the room froze. Forcing a smile, I softened my voice. "I mean, I'd rather save it for after the ceremony. It might clash with grandmother's necklace." My mother nodded, though I could see the question in her eyes. I'd been doing that a lot lately, making excuses, deflecting, maintaining the facade of a happy bride while my insides churned with the knowledge of what was to come. The cathedral bells began to toll, marking the quarter hour. 15 minutes until the ceremony. 15 minutes until I walked down that aisle and changed everything. My bridesmaids burst into a flurry of last-minute activity, checking their hair, straightening their dresses, gathering their bouquets. "The groomsmen are in position," Marina announced, popping her head in. "James is asking if you need anything. He seems nervous." She winked conspiratorially. More nervous than any groom I've ever seen, actually. I bet he was nervous. The night before, I'd sent him a single text. "I know everything." He'd called immediately, of course, but I'd let it go to voicemail. Let him sweat. Let him wonder. Exactly what I knew. Let him stand at that altar, in front of everyone who mattered in his world, and wonder which of his many secrets I'd discovered. The irony wasn't lost on me. How I'd spent months planning every detail of this wedding, from the hand-calligraphed place cards to the exact shade of pink for the sunset lighting. Now, all those details seemed trivial compared to the weight of the truth I carried, as heavy as the diamond ring on my finger. "It's almost time," my father said, appearing in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. He looked so proud, so happy to be giving his daughter away to a man he thought was worthy. A man he'd trusted with not just his daughter's future, but with millions in investment capital. The thought of his coming disappointment made my throat tight, but it also strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't, even just about James's betrayal of our relationship. This was about justice, about protecting others from the elaborate web of lies and fraud that James Preston III had woven under the guise of love and business acumen. As my bridesmaids filed out to take their positions, Rachel squeezed my hand one last time. "Ready to become Mrs. Preston?" I smiled, gripping my bouquet just a little tighter, feeling the edge of the USB drive press against my palm. "More than ready?" I replied, and for the first time that day, it wasn't a lie. The heavy cathedral doors swung open, and the first notes of Pachelbel's canon filled the vast space. Through the gauzy veil, I could see the backs of everyone's heads turning, expecting to witness that magical moment when a bride first appears. The afternoon sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting ethereal patterns across the marble floor where my bridesmaids now gracefully processed. But something was off. From my position in the narthex, I could see James at the altar, phone in hand, typing frantically. His best man, Michael, was leaning in, whispering something, urgent in his ear. Even from this distance, I could see the color draining from James's face. "Is everything all right?" my father whispered, feeling my slight hesitation. "Perfect," I replied, tightening my grip on my bouquet. I knew exactly what was happening. Sarah, James's business associate from London, would be sending her own wedding gift right about now, a detailed email to the board members of Preston Technologies about certain financial discrepancies. Timing, after all, was everything. The string quartet transitioned seamlessly into the next piece as Olivia, my last bridesmaid, began her walk. James was now visibly agitated, pulling at his collar, his eyes darting to the side chapel where I knew his phone had just buzzed again. His mother, Caroline Preston, resplendent in her designer dress and family jewels, was frowning from her front row seat. "Darling," my mother touched my arm, her voice barely a whisper. "You're shaking. Are you cold?" I wasn't shaking from cold, but from anticipation. 3 days ago, when that first anonymous email had landed in my inbox, I'd been the one shaking, from shock and betrayal. Now it was James's turn to feel his carefully constructed world trembling beneath his feet. Marina appeared at my elbow, her professional smile slightly strained. "There's a small, technical issue," she murmured. "The groom is requesting a 5-minute delay. Something about an urgent business matter?" "No," I said firmly, surprising both Marina and my parents. "No delays. Everything proceeds as planned." My father squeezed my arm appreciatively, misinterpreting my decisiveness as bridal enthusiasm. If he only knew that every minute we waited was another minute for James to potentially escape the reckoning that was coming. The first notes of the bridal march began to play. This was it. My father and I stepped into position, and I could feel 300 pairs of eyes fixed upon me. Through my veil, I could see James's sister dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, his father beaming with paternal pride, and Rachel watching me with that same worried expression she'd worn all morning. As we began our procession down the aisle, I caught glimpses of familiar faces, college friends, business associates, society matrons who'd followed the Preston family's success for generations. They all wore expressions of joy and anticipation, completely unaware that they were about to witness something far more dramatic than a simple exchange of vows. Halfway down the aisle, I saw James's cousin Bradley slip into the back of the church, late as usual. But instead of taking his seat, he remained standing, phone pressed to his ear, his face growing increasingly alarmed. Another piece falling into place. The financial records I'd sent to the SEC would be hitting the news feeds any minute now. James was now shifting from foot to foot, his face a mask of barely contained panic. Michael kept glancing between him and his own phone, which was lighting up with notifications. In the front row, Caroline Preston's frown had deepened into a scowl as she noticed the growing tension at the altar. My father's steady pace kept us moving forward, each step bringing us closer to the moment of truth. The cathedral's acoustics carried the faintest whispers of confusion from the guests who had begun to notice something wasn't quite right. The perfect Preston family wedding was showing its first cracks, visible to anyone paying attention. Through it all, I maintained my serene bridal smile, though my heart was pounding so hard I was sure Rachel could hear it from her position at the altar. The USB drive in my bouquet seemed to pulse with its own energy, waiting for its moment to destroy the elaborate facade James had built. As we reached the altar steps, I saw James's phone light up one final time. His sharp intake of breath told me he'd just received the message I'd scheduled to be delivered at exactly this moment. A single photo, taken 6 months ago at the Plaza Hotel in New York, showing him with not one but two of his other women, paid for with embezzled funds from his father-in-law's investment. "Who gives this woman to be married?" the priest intoned, his voice echoing through the suddenly hushed cathedral. My father stepped forward, ready to speak the traditional words that would hand me over to James Preston III. But before he could utter a sound, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the church burst open. Detective Sarah Martinez strode down the center aisle, her badge glinting in the cathedral light, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. The collective gasp from 300 guests created a rush of whispers that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. James's face, already pale, now turned ashen. "I apologize for interrupting," Detective Martinez announced, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed space. "But I'm afraid this ceremony cannot proceed." She turned to face James, her expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Preston, we need to discuss some rather serious financial discrepancies." Caroline Preston shot to her feet, designer dress rustling. "This is outrageous. Do you have any idea who we are? Who do you think you—" "I know exactly who you are, Mrs. Preston," the detective cut in smoothly. "And I'm well aware of your family's reputation. That's precisely why I'm here." She held up a document. "This is a warrant to search all Preston Technology financial records and personal accounts." The whispers turned to murmurs. James's father, Richard Preston II, stood up slowly, his aristocratic features twisted with confusion. "There must be some mistake. Our company's finances are completely transparent. We just passed an external audit last quarter." I watched as James's right hand twitched toward his pocket, toward his phone, but Michael grabbed his arm, stopping him. "Smart man. Destroying evidence wouldn't help now." "Victoria," James turned to me, his voice trembling but loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Sweetheart, this is just a misunderstanding. Let's proceed with our ceremony, and my lawyers will sort this out later." That was my cue. "Actually, James," I said, my voice steady as I lifted my veil, "I don't think we should proceed." I turned to face our guests, pulling the USB drive from my bouquet. "You see, I have proof that this isn't a misunderstanding at all." Marina, our wedding coordinator, made a small choking sound from the side aisle. Rachel's eyes widened in understanding, finally realizing why I'd been so calm all morning. But I kept my focus on James, watching as recognition dawned in his eyes. "The SEC has already received copies of everything I'm about to show you," I continued, moving toward the laptop that had been set up to display our wedding photo slideshow. "But I thought your family, our guests, and especially my father, deserved to see the truth for themselves." "Victoria!" James hissed, starting toward me, but Detective Martinez stepped between us. "I wouldn't, Mr. Preston," she warned. "You're in enough trouble already." My fingers were steady as I inserted the drive and pulled up the first document, a series of bank transfers showing how James had systematically siphoned money from my father's investment into offshore accounts. "For those in the back," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence, "these are records showing how James stole not just from my father, but from every investor in his latest tech venture. But that's not all." I clicked to the next file. "These are receipts from hotels across Europe and Asia, where James entertained his various companions using company funds. The photos that appeared on screen made Caroline Preston sink back into her seat, one manicured hand pressed to her throat. Images of James with different women in luxury hotels, timestamps showing they were taken during business trips when he was supposedly alone, when he was calling me every night to say how much he missed me. "You promised me the Milan merger, needed your personal attention," Richard Preston II said, his voice hoarse as he stared at a photo of his son in a Milan hotel suite, clearly not discussing business. "You said that's why you needed the extra funding." "Dad, I can explain," James started, but I wasn't finished. "The money trail is fascinating," I continued, bringing up more financial documents. "See, James didn't just steal from investors. He had a whole network of fake companies set up to hide his gambling debts. The Tokyo losses alone were in the millions. But my personal favorite," I clicked to the next slide, "is how he used my father's investment money to buy the engagement ring he gave me." A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. My father, still standing where we'd stopped at the altar steps, took a sharp breath. I turned to him, feeling tears finally beginning to burn in my eyes. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I only discovered all this 3 days ago. But once I knew, I couldn't let him keep deceiving everyone. I couldn't let him steal from more people, hurt more families." "You bitch," James snarled, his charming facade finally cracking completely. "You think you're so clever? You have no idea what you've done. I'll make sure you regret—" "Mr. Preston," Detective Martinez interrupted sharply, "I strongly advise you to stop talking. Officers, please secure the exits. No one leaves until we've gathered all devices containing potential evidence." Next few minutes were chaos. Caroline Preston was wailing about family reputation, Richard Preston II was demanding answers from his son, and various guests were either trying to leave or pressing forward to see the evidence still displayed on screen. Through it all, I stood firm, my bouquet now hanging loosely at my side, its weight so much lighter without the USB drive. The cathedral erupted into pandemonium. Guests who had come expecting champagne and cake were now witnessing the implosion of Boston's most prestigious family. Phones were out, recording everything despite the officers' attempts to maintain order. Tomorrow's headlines were being written in real time by the society columnists who had come to cover a fairy tale wedding. "Everything we built," Richard Preston, A's voice cut through the chaos as he confronted his son. "3 generations of trust in this community, and you—" His voice broke, decades of pride crumbling before my eyes. "How much? How much did you steal?" Before James could answer, his sister Charlotte pushed through the crowd. "It's not just the money, Dad," she said, her voice shaking. "I found something else." She thrust her phone toward Detective Martinez. "Those fake companies James set up? They've been laundering money for some very dangerous people. I started investigating when Victoria's message came through this morning." James lunged for the phone, but the officers were faster, restraining him as he finally showed his true colors. "You're my sister," he shouted, face contorted with rage. "You're supposed to be on my side." "I'm on the side of the truth," Charlotte replied, tears streaming down her face. "Just like Victoria. God. James, there are kids' college funds in those investments. Retirement accounts. People trusted you. We trusted you." My father had been silent throughout all of this, still standing where he'd been about to give me away. Now he stepped forward, his face a mask of controlled fury. "The ring," he said quietly, looking at my left hand. "You bought my daughter's engagement ring with money you stole from me?" "Mr. Hawthorne," James switched tactics, his voice taking on that smooth, persuasive tone I'd heard him use in business meetings. "Sir, I can explain everything. The market fluctuations, the temporary cash flow issues. It's all just a misunderstanding. Victoria's obviously confused about what she's found. If we could just—" "Confused?" I cut in, clicking to the next document on screen. Was I confused about the property you bought in Singapore under a false name? Or the shell company you created to hide your gambling losses in Macau? Each click brought up new evidence, new betrayals. Or maybe I'm confused about the private yacht you purchased last month using elderly investors' retirement funds? Caroline Preston, who had been alternating between wailing about the family name and trying to silence her daughter Charlotte, suddenly straightened up. "The yacht?" she repeated, turning to her husband. "Richard, he said that was your anniversary gift to me. It seems there are a lot of gifts James has been giving with other people's money," Detective Martinez observed dryly, examining Charlotte's phone. "Including, Mrs. Preston, those emerald earrings you're wearing right now." The society matron's hands flew to her ears, horror dawning on her face. The earrings had been James's Christmas gift to her. "A token of appreciation," he'd said, "for being such a supportive mother." Now we all knew whose money had actually paid for them. Rachel appeared at my side, slipping her hand into mine. "You knew," she whispered. "This is why you've been so calm. Why you insisted on handling the slideshow setup yourself this morning." I squeezed her hand, grateful for her support. "I couldn't tell anyone. I couldn't risk him finding out and running before—" My words were cut off by a commotion near the altar. Michael, James's best man, was backing away from him, shaking his head. "The Children's Hospital Fund," he was saying, his voice rising with disbelief. "You told me that investment was secure. My sister's kids, their medical treatments." "It was secure!" James shouted back. "Everything was fine until he jabbed a finger at me, started poking around where she didn't belong. This is your fault." He tried to move toward me again, but the officers held him firmly. "Mr. Preston," Detective Martinez's voice was steel, "I'm placing you under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and what I suspect will be a growing list of financial crimes once our forensic accountants finish their work." As the officers began reading James his rights, Caroline Preston made one last attempt to salvage the situation. "Surely we can handle this privately," she pleaded, looking around at the watching crowd. "The Preston family has always been discreet about its internal matters." "Discreet?" I couldn't help but laugh. Like how James was discreet about stealing from children's medical funds? Or discreet about using my father's money to fund his affairs? I turned to address the murmuring crowd. "The time for discretion is over. Too many people have been hurt, too many lives affected. The truth needed to come out." As the officers began to escort James toward the cathedral doors, a new voice cut through the chaos. "Wait!" Sarah Chen, our head of accounting at Preston Technologies, pushed through the crowd. She clutched a laptop to her chest, her usual professional composure cracking. "There's more. So much more." James went rigid, his face draining of what little color remained. I knew that look. It was the same expression he'd worn when I'd confronted him about the first set of suspicious transactions I'd discovered. But this time, there was no smooth explanation, no plausible denial ready on his silver tongue. Sarah set her laptop on the altar, an irony not lost on anyone, and began pulling up files. I've been tracking discrepancies for months, but he always had explanations. Always had documentation that seemed to check out. But after I received Victoria's email this morning, she looked at me, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You knew to look offshore, didn't you? That's how you found what I missed." I nodded. The Cayman Islands accounts were just the beginning. Once I started looking into his private email servers. "The Cancer Research Fund," Sarah interrupted, her voice breaking. "He didn't just take from the Children's Hospital Fund, the Preston Family Foundation's entire cancer research grant program." She turned to Richard Preston II, whose face had gone as ashen as his son's. "Sir, the money never made it to the research facilities, any of it, for the past 3 years." The collective gasp from the assembled guests was like a physical force. The Preston Family Foundation's cancer research program was legendary in Boston. They'd been featured in medical journals, praised for their generous support of breakthrough treatments. Lives had been saved, or so everyone thought. Caroline Preston swayed on her feet, reaching for a pew to steady herself. "But the reports," she whispered. "All those quarterly reports showing the progress, the breakthroughs." "Fabricated," Sarah confirmed, pulling up document after document. "The real research facilities haven't received funding since James took over the foundation's financial oversight. The money went to accounts in Dubai, Singapore, Switzerland." She looked at Detective Martinez. "I have everything documented here." Michael, still standing by the altar, looked like he might be sick. "The testimonials," he said. "Those patients who came to the foundation's fundraiser last month, talking about how the treatments saved their lives." "Actors," I said quietly. "I found the casting agency payments hidden in the foundation's administrative expenses files." The revelation hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow. These weren't just financial crimes anymore. These were lives directly affected, hopes crushed, real people denied potentially life-saving treatments. I watched as the truth of it rippled through the church, turning shocked expressions to ones of horror and disgust. Richard Preston II sank into a pew, decades of pride and accomplishment crumbling before his eyes. "My father started that program," he said, his voice hollow. "After my sister, your Aunt Grace, died of breast cancer. He promised her on her deathbed that our family would help find a cure." He looked at his son with devastation etched into every line of his face. "How could you?" James, still restrained by officers, had dropped all pretense of innocence. His handsome features twisted into something ugly as he spat out, "The foundation was bleeding money. Do you know how expensive medical research is? I found a better use for those funds. More profitable investments." "Profitable?" Charlotte's voice cracked like a whip. "You mean like the yacht? The women? The gambling?" She turned to Detective Martinez. "I want to press charges too, on behalf of the foundation. We trusted him. The whole family trusted him. And he—" "It's all documented," Sarah said, still pulling up files. "Every transaction, every fake report, every diverted donation." She looked at me. Victoria wasn't the only one keeping receipts. The weight of what James had done, the true scope of his betrayal, seemed to finally hit Caroline Preston. She stood up, designer dress wrinkled, perfect makeup streaked with tears, and walked slowly to where her son stood. For a moment, everyone held their breath, wondering if she would defend him one last time. Instead, she reached up and removed her emerald earrings, the ones he'd bought with stolen money, and dropped them into Detective Martinez's hand. "Take them," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "Take everything he bought with those funds. The Preston family will make this right." She turned to the assembled guests, drawing herself up with whatever dignity she could muster. "Every penny will be repaid. Every program will be restored. The foundation's work is too important to let one person's greed destroy it." The weight of Caroline Preston's words hung in the air, a promise made amidst the ruins of her family's reputation. But James wasn't finished. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the cathedral's vaulted ceiling. "Make it right?" he sneered at his mother. "With what money? Everything's gone. The foundation's accounts, Dad's retirement fund, even your precious family trust." His face twisted into a cruel smile. "Did you really think I'd leave anything untouched? I've been planning this for years." Richard Preston II staggered as if physically struck. "The family trust? But that's been protected for generations. There are safeguards, multiple trustees, all of whom trusted their beloved James Preston III implicitly," I cut in, pulling up another document on the screen. "Show them, Sarah. Show them how he did it." Sarah's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard. He used the foundation's stellar reputation to convince the trustees to invest in his tech ventures. Shell companies. All of them. The money was moved. Through so many accounts that by the time anyone noticed, "It's not just gone," Charlotte added, her voice hollow as she stared at her phone. "He leveraged it. All of it. The debts." She looked up, face pale. "We're not just broke. We're worse than broke." The murmurs from the assembled guests grew louder. These weren't just society friends anymore. These were investors, board members, charity directors, people who had trusted the Preston name with their money, their hopes, their futures. My father stepped forward, his businessman's mind already calculating. "The properties can be liquidated, the assets frozen. We can—" "Already sold," James interrupted, seeming to take a perverse pleasure in destroying every hope of recovery. "Or mortgaged to the hilt. Face it, Dad." He turned to his father. "Your precious Preston legacy is worth less than the paper it's printed on." Detective Martinez signaled to her officers, "I think we've heard enough. Mr. Preston, we'll be adding wire fraud and criminal conspiracy to your charges." But before they could lead him away, Reverend Matthews, who had been standing silently by his pulpit throughout the revelations, spoke up. "There's one thing I don't understand, James." His gentle voice carried surprising authority. "Why? You had everything, family, position, the love of a good woman. Why throw it all away?" For the first time I saw something flicker across James's face. Not remorse exactly, but perhaps a shadow of recognition of all he'd lost. Then it was gone, replaced by that cold smugness I'd come to recognize as his true nature. "Because I could," he said simply. "Because you all made it so easy." The loving fiancé? He looked at me with contempt. So trusting, so eager to believe in our perfect love story. The proud parents, so quick to hand over the reins to their precious son. The society friends, so impressed by the Preston name they never questioned where the money came from. "And the patients?" Sarah demanded. "The sick children who needed those research funds?" James shrugged, the gesture so casual it made my stomach turn. "Collateral damage. Business is business." The collective intake of breath from the assembled guests was like a physical force. Any sympathy, any inclination to view this as a misunderstanding, or a temporary lapse in judgment, evaporated with those words. Rachel stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "I introduced you to Victoria. I vouched for you. All those times she came to me with little doubts, little worries. I told her she was being paranoid, that you were one of the good ones." "Oh, spare me the dramatics," James rolled his eyes. "You were all so willing to be fooled. The perfect Preston prince, the charitable foundation, the fairy tale romance. You wanted to believe in it so badly, you ignored every red flag." "Not every red flag," I said quietly, drawing his attention back to me. "I saw them. I just needed proof." I turned to the assembled guests. "That's why today had to happen. This way." A private confrontation wouldn't have been enough. He would have found a way to spin it, to maintain the facade. The truth needed witnesses. Caroline Preston had been silent since her promise to make things right. Now she walked slowly to the altar, picked up her son's abandoned boutonniere, and let it fall to the ground. "Take him away," she said to the officers, her voice steady despite her tears. "The Preston name might be ruined, but at least now we can stop living a lie." As the officers finally began to lead James toward the door, he called back over his shoulder. "You'll regret this, Victoria. When the dust settles, when everyone sees how you destroyed this family—" "No, James," I interrupted, my voice carrying clearly through the hushed cathedral. "You destroyed this family. I just exposed the truth. There's a difference." As the heavy cathedral doors closed behind James and the officers, the enormity of what had just happened seemed to crash down on everyone at once. The magnificent church, decorated for what should have been Boston's wedding of the year, now felt more like a crime scene. Which, in a way, it was. Marina, our wedding coordinator, was the first to break the shocked silence. I suppose I should. Cancel. The reception? Her voice wavered as she clutched her clipboard like a shield. 300 guests, a 5-star hotel ballroom, a 12-piece orchestra, all the trappings of a celebration that would never happen. Yes, I said quietly. But first, make sure everyone knows they're needed here. I turned to Detective Martinez. You'll need statements, I assume? And contact information for all the investors present? The detective nodded, already organizing her team. Anyone who invested in Preston Technologies or donated to the foundation in the last 5 years should stay. We'll need to document everything. Richard Preston II had not moved from his pew, his proud shoulders now bent under the weight of his son's betrayal. Charlotte sat beside him, one hand on his arm, the other still clutching her phone with its damning evidence. "Daddy," she said softly, "we need to call the board. And the other trustees. They need to hear it from us before it hits the news." At the word news, several society reporters who had come to cover the wedding were already rushing for the exits, phones in hand. Tomorrow's headlines would be very different from the society pages they'd expected to write. Sarah was still at her laptop, now surrounded by a group of shell-shocked Preston Technologies executives. "The trading algorithms," one was saying. "The proprietary software we were developing." "Never existed," Sarah replied grimly. "The demos we saw were modified versions of existing products. The millions in development costs went straight to his private accounts." My father had moved to join their discussion, his business mind already working on damage control. "How many employees?" 237, Sarah answered promptly. Most of them had no idea. They were doing real work, developing real products. They just didn't know their salaries were being paid with. She trailed off, looking ill. "With stolen money," I finished for her. "From cancer research funds, children's medical treatments, retirement accounts." The scope of James's betrayal seemed to grow with each passing minute. Rachel appeared at my side, holding a glass of water. "Drink," she ordered. "You're shaking." She was right. Now that the adrenaline was wearing off, I could feel tremors starting in my hands. "I just keep thinking," I said, taking the water. "If I hadn't received that email, if Sarah hadn't double-checked those accounts, if Charlotte hadn't investigated further." I looked around the cathedral at all the lives James had affected. How much longer would it have gone on? Caroline Preston overheard me. She had been standing alone near the altar, still elegant despite her tears. Now she approached, her composure remarkably intact for a woman whose world had just imploded. "You did the right thing," she said, surprising me. "The hardest thing, but the right thing." She twisted her wedding ring, a Preston family heirloom that would now be seized as evidence. I kept ignoring the signs, the late-night phone calls, the mysterious business trips, the way the Foundation's reports never quite added up. She straightened her shoulders. "Well, no more hiding. We'll face this head-on." Reverend Matthews, who had been quietly organizing his shocked parishioners, joined our conversation. "The church will help however we can," he offered. "Our community outreach program might be able to assist some of the affected families until we can access the records and see exactly what was stolen from whom," Detective Martinez finished, returning from giving instructions to her team. "Mrs. Preston, we'll need you and your husband to come to the station. There's a lot to go through." Charlotte spoke up from where she sat with her father. "I've been compiling everything I found. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the fake medical research data." She stood, determination replacing shock on her face. "I'll help. I have a background in forensic accounting. That's how I started spotting the inconsistencies. I'll need to speak with all of you. the detective said, looking at me, Sarah, and Charlotte. Your evidence, your timelines of discovery, everything that led to today. As if the word today had broken some final spell, I suddenly became aware of my wedding dress, the veil now hanging limply down my back, the bouquet abandoned somewhere during the revelations. All these symbols of a future that had evaporated in a matter of hours. Rachel, ever practical, seemed to read my thoughts. "Let's get you changed," she said gently. "There's a long day ahead, and you can't give your statement to the police in a wedding dress." "Actually," Detective Martinez interjected, "we'll need to log the dress as evidence. The USB drive in the bouquet, the phone with the original email. Everything from today needs to be documented." I nodded, understanding. This wasn't just a canceled wedding anymore. It was the beginning of what promised to be a long, complex investigation. As I looked around the cathedral at the clusters of shocked guests, devastated investors, and determined law enforcement officers, I realized that exposing James's crimes was just the first step. The real work, the recovery, the rebuilding, the quest for justice, was only beginning. The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and documented evidence. The cathedral's bridal suite had been transformed into a makeshift command center, with Detective Martinez's team cataloging evidence while traumatized guests waited to give their statements. The wedding dress I'd chosen so carefully now lay carefully tagged in an evidence bag, along with the bouquet and its hidden USB drive. "The media's going crazy outside," Rachel reported, returning from a brief venture to the cathedral steps. She'd changed out of her bridesmaid dress into the casual clothes she'd brought for after the reception. "Every news outlet in Boston is here. Someone leaked the cancer research angle." I was now wearing the spare clothes Rachel had thought to bring for me. My best friend had always been the practical one. "How bad is it?" "Bad," she admitted. "The Preston name is trending on social media. People who donated to the foundation are coming forward. There's already talk of a class action lawsuit." Sarah looked up from where she was working with the forensic accountants. "It's worse than that. The technology partners are pulling out. 3 major contracts canceled in the last hour. Preston Technologies." She shook her head. 237 employees might be out of work by Monday. My father, who had been in constant phone contact with his legal team, ended his latest call with a grim expression. "The SEC is freezing everything connected to the Preston name. Bank accounts, properties, business assets, all locked down. Pending investigation." "Good," Charlotte said firmly. She'd been working non-stop, providing investigators with access to all the evidence she'd gathered. "We need to stop any more money from disappearing." James had fail-safes in place, programs designed to transfer funds if certain accounts were accessed. We caught most of them, but we might never recover everything, Detective Martinez finished. She looked exhausted but determined. "The international accounts alone. We'll need cooperation from authorities in at least 6 countries." Caroline Preston sat quietly in a corner, her perfect posture finally beginning to crack. She'd removed all her jewelry, not just the tainted emerald earrings, but everything that might have been purchased with stolen funds. Her husband had been taken to the police station an hour ago to give a formal statement about the foundation's operations. "I keep thinking about Grace," Caroline said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Richard's sister. She died believing her death would help others through the research foundation. All those families who donated in memory of their loved ones." She looked up at me, her eyes red but dry. "Thank you for stopping this before he could hurt more people." A young officer appeared in the doorway. "Detective, we've got reporters asking for statements, and there's a group of Preston Technologies employees gathering outside. They're demanding answers about their jobs, their stock options." "No statements yet," the detective replied firmly. "But get me contact information for the employees. They're victims in this too. They'll need to be included in the investigation. Rachel touched my arm gently. Your phone's been blowing up. The wedding guests who left, they're all asking what they can do to help. I looked at my phone for the first time in hours. Hundreds of messages, missed calls, social media notifications. The story was spreading like wildfire through Boston's social circles and beyond. But among the chaos, I saw something emerging. Offers of help, promises of support, people reaching out to connect with others who'd been affected. We need to organize this, I said, a plan forming. All these people wanting to help. We need to channel it properly. I turned to Sarah. The employees at Preston Technologies, they're innocent in all this. They did real work, developed real products. Sarah nodded, understanding where I was going. The intellectual property is there, even if the company structure was corrupt, with proper funding, proper management. My firm might be interested, my father spoke up. Not in the Preston name, obviously, but in the legitimate technology and the employees behind it. If we could structure a new company. Charlotte had been listening intently. I can help with that. I know which projects were real and which were just fronts for James's schemes. We could salvage the genuine innovations, protect the jobs. And the foundation? Caroline asked quietly. All those research programs, the medical trials. We start over, I said firmly. New name, new structure, complete transparency. The mission was always good. Helping cancer patients, funding research. The corruption was in the execution, not the idea. Detective Martinez watched this exchange with interest. You're all thinking long-term. That's good. But first, she held up a thick stack of statements. We need to make sure justice is served. Your testimony, the evidence you gathered, it's going to be crucial in making sure James and anyone who helped him face consequences. A commotion outside drew our attention. Through the window, I could see more news vans arriving, more reporters, gathering. The story was growing, evolving from a scandalous wedding cancellation into something much bigger. A story about corruption, betrayal, and hopefully, eventual redemption. They're going to want to hear from you, Rachel said softly. All of you. The jilted bride who exposed the truth, the sister who helped bring down her own brother's schemes, the employees and investors who were deceived, the mother who chose justice over family loyalty. Let them wait, I replied, turning back to the work at hand. Right now, we focus on facts, on evidence, on helping the people who were hurt. The story can wait. The truth is what matters. By evening, the cathedral had emptied of all but the core group of people dealing with the immediate aftermath. The magnificent floral arrangements that had cost a fortune, likely paid for with stolen money, were wilting in the warm June air. Outside, the media circus continued to grow, but inside, exhaustion had settled over everyone like a heavy blanket. The initial estimates are in, Sarah said, looking up from her laptop with reddened eyes. Just from what we can trace so far. Over $50 million. The Cancer Research Foundation, the technology company, private investors, the family trust. She shook her head, still struggling to comprehend the scope of it. Charlotte, who had been on the phone with the company's board members for the past hour, finally ended her call. They're calling an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. The board wants to dissolve Preston Technologies completely. No, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Everyone in the room turned to look at me. We can't let that happen. 237 families depend on those jobs. Real people who did honest work. My father nodded slowly. Victoria's right. Dismantling the company punishes the wrong people. He pulled out his phone. Let me make some calls. There are venture capital firms that might be interested in acquiring the legitimate assets, keeping the workforce intact under new management. Caroline Preston, who had been silent for the past hour, spoke up. Use my connections too. Her voice was hoarse but determined. The Preston name might be toxic now, but I still know every major player in Boston's business community. If we can save those jobs. She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. It won't make up for what James did, but it's a start. Detective Martinez returned from her latest phone call with the prosecutor's office. James is being held without bail, she announced. The evidence is overwhelming and they're concerned about flight risk. He had a go bag in his office. Cash, fake passports, the works. Of course he did, Charlotte said bitterly. He probably planned to run as soon as he had access to my father's retirement accounts. The wedding was just his cover for the final phase of his scheme. The realization hit me hard. The wedding, my wedding, had never been about love or commitment. It had been just another con in James's elaborate fraud. Every kiss, every promise, every moment we'd shared, all calculated steps in his master plan. Rachel must have seen something in my face because she was instantly at my side. Don't, she said firmly. Don't let him take anything more from you, not even memories. There's someone here to see you, Ms. Hawthorne. A young officer appeared in the doorway. A Dr. Eleanor Chen from Mass General? She says it's about the Research Foundation. I looked at Caroline, who nodded. Let her in. Dr. Chen turned out to be a petite woman in her 50s, still wearing her lab coat. Her face was familiar from Foundation events, though now I wondered if she'd been one of the real researchers or part of James's elaborate deception. I came as soon as I heard, she said, looking around the room. The news about the foundation, about the missing research funds. She took a deep breath. I have 3 clinical trials running right now. 78 patients depending on treatments that were supposed to be funded through next year. The weight of what James had stolen, not just money but hope, lives, futures, settled over the room like a physical presence. Tell me what you need, Caroline said, rising from her chair. Exact numbers, timelines, everything. There are other funding sources we can approach, emergency grants. I have connections at other foundations, my father added. If we explain the situation, document the trial's progress. Sarah was already pulling up spreadsheets. We should create a complete list of all affected medical programs, prioritize by immediate need, patient impact. I watched as the room transformed, exhaustion giving way to purpose. These people, all victims of James's betrayal in their own ways, were choosing to focus on solutions rather than despair. Victoria, Dr. Chen turned to me. The media's calling you a whistleblower, a hero. But I need to know, are you in this for the long haul? Because rebuilding what was destroyed, making this right, it's going to take time. Years, maybe. I thought about the life I'd planned, the honeymoon in the Maldives, the future as Mrs. James Preston III, the comfortable existence as part of Boston's elite. That dream had been built on lies, but maybe its destruction could lead to something more meaningful. I'm in, I said firmly. Whatever it takes. These people deserve justice, and more importantly, they deserve help. Rachel squeezed my hand. You're not alone in this. None of you are, she added, looking around the room at the unlikely alliance that had formed in the wake of disaster. The jilted bride, the betrayed sister, the devastated mother, the dedicated professionals, all united in the desire to make things right. Outside, the sun was setting over Boston, casting long shadows through the cathedral's stained glass windows. The day that had begun with dreams of a perfect wedding was ending with something very different. Not a fairy tale ending, but perhaps the beginning of something more important, a chance to turn betrayal into redemption, to transform pain into purpose. The morning after the wedding turned expose dawned cold and gray, fitting the mood that hung over Boston's financial district. I sat in my father's office conference room, surrounded by legal teams, forensic accountants, and crisis management specialists. The wall-mounted TVs were tuned to different news channels, all running variations of the same headline. Preston. Empire crumbles. Cancer research funds stolen in massive fraud scheme. The press is calling it the wedding that saved lives, Rachel said, sliding a coffee across the table to me. She'd stayed the night at my apartment, fielding calls and protecting me from the media frenzy that had erupted outside my building. They're painting you as some kind of avenging angel in a wedding dress. Let them, Sarah interjected, not looking up from her laptop where she was compiling financial records. Public sympathy is crucial right now. We need investors to understand they were victims of fraud, not just bad business decisions. The door opened, and Charlotte walked in, looking exhausted but determined. She'd spent the night working with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, mapping out her brother's network of fake companies and offshore accounts. They found another shell corporation in Singapore, she announced. This one linked to a series of cryptocurrency transactions. James was apparently planning something big for next month. The company's annual charity gala, Caroline Preston supplied, entering behind her daughter. She looked decades older than she had yesterday morning, her usual perfect appearance showing signs of strain. He was going to announce a major expansion of the research program. More fake trials, more diverted funds, which means more potential victims we managed to save, my father pointed out. He'd been up all night with his investment team, working to protect what assets they could and identify ways to help the affected employees. The damage is bad, but it could have been much worse. The conference room door opened again, and Detective Martinez entered with a new face, a federal prosecutor named Adams. We've got James on multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement, Adams announced without preamble. But we're here because we need to discuss something else. He's offering a deal. The room went silent. Caroline's hand flew to her throat, and Charlotte's face hardened. What kind of deal? I asked, though I already had a suspicion. He claims there are more accounts we haven't found, Martinez explained. More money hidden away. He's willing to reveal their locations in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's lying, Charlotte said immediately. This is another manipulation. He's trying to maintain control, keep us dancing to his tune. Maybe, Adams acknowledged. But we have to consider the possibility that he's telling the truth. There are cancer patients waiting for treatments, employees who need their pensions restored. No, I said firmly, standing up. This is exactly how he operates. He dangles hope, makes people desperate, then uses that desperation to manipulate them. I turned to Sarah. How many accounts have we found so far? Sarah consulted her records. 37 confirmed, another 12 suspected, based on the transaction patterns. And how did we find them? I pressed. Through the documentation you gathered, she replied. The email trails, the bank records. Exactly. I faced Adams. We don't need James's cooperation. The evidence is there. We just have to keep digging. If we take his deal, he wins. He gets to keep playing games, keep controlling the narrative. Caroline stood up slowly. Victoria's right. My son. He's been playing games his whole life, making people depend on him, trust him, then using that trust as a weapon. No more. Rachel, who had been quiet, suddenly spoke up. There's something else to consider. The media angle. All eyes turned to her. Right now, public sympathy is with the victims. The moment we cut a deal with James, that narrative changes. People will start wondering what else we're hiding, why we're willing to negotiate with someone who stole from cancer patients. The prosecutor looked thoughtful. You make valid points, but the recovery process would be faster with his cooperation. Some things are more important than speed, my father said quietly. like showing other potential fraudsters that they can't manipulate their way out of consequences. Dr. Chen, who had been sitting silently in the corner reviewing patient files, finally spoke. "My patients can't wait forever," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "But they also deserve real justice. And if there's one thing I've learned in cancer research, it's that sometimes the hardest path is the right one." A knock at the door interrupted us. A young assistant entered with a tablet. "You need to see this," she said, pulling up a news feed. "James's cellmate just gave an interview to the morning shows." We watched in stunned silence as the interview played out. James, it seemed, had spent the night boasting about his schemes, bragging about how he'd manipulated everyone around him. He'd called me a naive little rich girl who had gotten lucky in exposing him. "Well," Charlotte said into the silence that followed, "I guess he just made our decision easier. No deals." Detective Martinez nodded. "I'll inform the prosecutor's office. We do this the hard way. Follow every lead, trace every transaction, build an ironclad case. In the meantime," my father added, "we focus on what we can control. Saving jobs, restoring research funding, helping the victims rebuild." I looked around the room at these people who had been strangers just days ago, now united in purpose. The path ahead would be long and difficult, but at least we were facing it together, with truth and integrity as our guides. By late afternoon, the conference room had transformed into a crisis management center. Whiteboards covered the walls, filled with flowcharts, timelines, and lists of affected parties. The Preston scandal had sent shockwaves through Boston's business and philanthropic communities, and the ripple effects were still expanding. "Another research facility just reached out," Sarah announced, adding to our growing list. They were promised funding for a breast cancer trial starting next month. 30 patients already enrolled. She rubbed her temples, exhaustion evident in every movement. How did none of us see this coming? The numbers were right there. "Because James designed the system to hide in plain sight," Charlotte replied, passing out fresh coffee to the team. Every transaction looked legitimate on its own. It was only when you stepped back and looked at the whole picture. "Like a magic trick," Rachel mused. "He kept everyone focused on the small details while the real deception was happening on a larger scale." A commotion outside drew our attention. Through the glass walls, we could see a group of Preston Technologies employees gathering in the lobby. They looked shell-shocked, clutching newspapers with headlines about their company's imminent collapse. "I need to talk to them," I said, standing up. My father caught my arm. "Victoria, are you sure? These people just lost their jobs, their stock options, maybe their pensions." "Because of James, not because of me," I replied firmly. "They deserve to hear the truth from someone who'll look them in the eye while telling it." Caroline Preston rose as well. "I'll go with you. As a Preston, I owe them that much." We made our way to the lobby where the employees fell silent at our approach. I recognized many faces from company events. Brilliant engineers, dedicated developers, honest people who'd believed in the company's mission. "I know you have questions," I began, my voice steady. "You deserve answers. But more than that, you deserve a future. That's why we're working with venture capital firms to preserve the valid projects, to transfer the legitimate intellectual property to new ownership." "What about our families?" a voice called out. "My daughter's starting college in the fall. Her scholarship was through the Preston Foundation." "The foundation's legitimate assets are being transferred to a new trust," Caroline stepped forward. "All valid scholarships will be honored. I've already signed over my personal property as collateral to ensure it." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Caroline Preston, known for her designer wardrobe and society parties, had spent the morning liquidating her personal assets to help cover the foundation's commitments. "But how do we know this isn't just another cover-up?" someone else demanded. How can we trust anything associated with the Preston name? You don't have to, I replied. That's why we're being completely transparent. Every transaction, every decision, every step of the recovery process will be publicly documented. We're setting up an independent oversight committee. I'll vouch for that, a new voice joined the conversation. Dr. Chen had arrived, along with representatives from other research institutions. The medical community is establishing its own review board. No more taking things on faith. Everything will be verified. The tension in the lobby began to shift. Fear and anger were still present, but now mixed with cautious hope. We're not asking you to trust blindly, Charlotte added, joining us. We're asking you to be part of the solution. We need your expertise, your knowledge of the legitimate projects, to help separate what was real from what was fraud. Sarah emerged from the conference room with stacks of papers. We've set up a secure website where you can document your projects, your contributions. Legal teams will review everything, ensure proper attribution and protection of intellectual property rights. As the crowd began to engage, asking practical questions and offering information, Rachel touched my arm. Look, she whispered, nodding toward the glass doors. Outside, more people were gathering, patients from the research programs, families who donated to the foundation, community members holding signs of support. The media was there too, but they weren't the circling vultures of yesterday. The story was evolving from scandal to recovery. My father emerged from his office, phone in hand. Just got off with the Venture Capital Consortium. They're willing to back a new entity, clean slate, new management, but preserving the viable technology and the jobs behind it. And I've heard from other foundations, Caroline added. They're offering bridge funding for the medical trials, emergency grants to keep the research going while we sort out the legal issues. A young engineer raised her hand. What about the Preston name? The company brand is toxic now. Then we build something new, I said firmly. Not based on a family name or reputation, but on transparency, accountability, and actual innovation. The truth isn't always pretty, but it's the only foundation worth building on. Detective Martinez appeared at the edge of the crowd, catching my eye. She gestured for me to join her, her expression serious. What is it? I asked, stepping aside. James is talking, she said quietly. Not to us, he's still playing games with the prosecution, but he's been bragging to other inmates, telling stories. Victoria, there's more. Much more than we thought. Detective Martinez led me to a private office where Charlotte and Sarah were already waiting. The detective's tablet displayed prison surveillance footage. James, sitting casually in the common area, holding court with other inmates like some twisted corporate seminar. He's been bragging, Martinez said, her voice tight with controlled anger, about how the cancer research fraud was just the tip of the iceberg. Apparently, he had a whole network of fake charities, not just in Boston but across the country. Children's hospitals, veterans organizations, disaster relief funds. Charlotte sank into a chair, her face ashen. The Preston Foundation's National Partnerships Program. I always wondered why he insisted on handling those personally. Sarah was already pulling up files on her laptop. The foundation made donations to dozens of charities over the past 3 years. If they were all fake. She trailed off, the implications too horrific to voice. Not all of them, Martinez clarified. That was part of his genius, according to him. He mixed legitimate charities with fake ones. The real ones provided cover for the fraudulent ones, made the whole operation look legitimate. A knock at the door interrupted us. Caroline Preston entered, followed by my father and Dr. Chen. The media's reporting new allegations, Caroline said, her voice unnaturally calm. Something about veterans' benefits. Wounded Warriors United? Charlotte said suddenly, pulling up a file on her phone. It was one of James's pet projects. He said it was providing prosthetics and rehabilitation services to injured veterans. The foundation donated millions. I remember the promotional videos, I said, feeling sick. Those veterans thanking the foundation for changing their lives. Actors, Martinez confirmed. All of it staged. The real veterans never saw a penny. The money went through a series of shell companies and ended up in accounts in the Cayman Islands. Dr. Chen, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up. The medical equipment donations. Last year, the foundation announced a program to provide specialized equipment to rural hospitals. James handled the publicity himself. Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard. Found it. $20 million allocated for medical equipment. The paperwork shows deliveries to 32 hospitals across 5 states, but the equipment never arrived, Martinez finished. The hospitals exist, but they never received anything. The tracking numbers, the delivery confirmations, all forged. My father, ever the businessman, was already calculating. If this extends beyond Boston, beyond the foundation, we're looking at hundreds of millions in fraud, maybe billions, and hundreds, maybe thousands more victims, I added, thinking of all the people who had believed in these causes, who had donated their money and trust to help others. Caroline Preston stood absolutely still, her aristocratic bearing a sharp contrast to the devastation in her eyes. He used our name, generations of charitable giving, of public trust, to steal from the most vulnerable people in society. Veterans, sick children, disaster victims. Another knock, more urgent this time. Rachel burst in, holding her phone. You need to see this. James just gave an interview to a true crime podcast from prison. He's bragging about everything, calling himself the Robin Hood in reverse, stealing from charities to fund his lifestyle. Martinez took the phone, her expression darkening as she listened. He thinks this is funny. He's proud of it. No, I said, standing up. He's scared. This is what James does when he's cornered. He tries to control the narrative, make it seem like he's still in charge. But he's revealed something crucial. What do you mean? Charlotte asked. Listen to how he's bragging about the scope of it all. About how no one could possibly track down all the fake charities, all the victims. I turned to Sarah. He's giving us a roadmap. Every boast is a lead we can follow. Sarah's eyes lit up with understanding. You're right. The more he talks, the more evidence he gives us, Martinez nodded. My team's already pulling transcripts of his conversations with other inmates. Every name he drops, every scheme he brags about, it's all admissible evidence. We need to get ahead of this, my father said, already reaching for his phone. Set up a national hotline for potential victims. Create a database to track claims. And we need to reach out to legitimate charities, Caroline added, her voice stronger now. Help them prove they weren't part of his schemes. The last thing we need is people losing faith in all charitable giving. Dr. Chen stepped forward. The medical community will help. We can verify which equipment donations were real, which research programs actually received funding. And I'll coordinate with other FBI field offices, Martinez said. If he was operating nationwide, we'll need a coordinated investigation. I looked around the room at these people, all working to unravel James's web of deception and help his victims. The task ahead was enormous, but something had shifted. James's attempts to grandstand, to make his crimes seem like clever achievements, had only strengthened our resolve. He thinks this makes him look powerful, Charlotte observed, watching the prison footage again. But all he's doing is showing everyone exactly who he really is. A man who took pleasure in hurting people who needed help the most. Then let him talk, I said firmly. Let him brag. Every word out of his mouth helps us find another victim to help, another wrong to right. He wanted to be remembered as a criminal mastermind? Instead, he'll be remembered as the man whose arrogance brought his own crimes to light. Within hours of James's prison interview going viral, our crisis center had to relocate to a larger space. My father's investment firm offered their entire executive floor, and we quickly transformed it into a command center for what was becoming a nationwide operation. We've identified 15 more fake charities so far, Sarah reported, updating the digital map that now dominated the main wall. Red pins marked confirmed fraudulent organizations, yellow for suspected ones, and green for legitimate charities that had been unwittingly used as cover. The map looked like it had broken out in a rash of red and yellow, spreading across multiple states. The veterans groups are the most extensive network, Charlotte added, coordinating with FBI teams across the country. He used their legitimacy to create a whole shadow system of fake rehabilitation centers. The real veterans organizations are devastated, their reputations, their donor trust. Focus on the solutions, I interrupted, seeing the overwhelming weight of it all threatening to crush her. What can we do right now? Rachel, who had transformed from bridesmaid to communications director overnight, looked up from her laptop. I've got representatives from legitimate veterans organizations flying in tomorrow. They want to help identify real veterans who were promised services and never received them. Good, my father nodded. And I've got commitments from 12 other investment firms. They're creating an emergency fund to support verified victims while the legal process plays out. Dr. Chen rushed in, waving a stack of papers. We found something in the medical equipment scandal. The tracking numbers James used for the fake deliveries? They weren't completely fake. They were modified numbers from real shipments to other hospitals. Which means there's a paper trail, Detective Martinez said, immediately grasping the significance. Real equipment that was diverted somewhere else. Already on it, Sarah called out, her fingers flying across her keyboard. Cross-referencing? Shipping manifests with hospital records. Wait. She sat back, staring at her screen. Some of this equipment shows up in inventories overseas. High-end medical equipment being used in private clinics in Dubai, Singapore. He was double-dipping, I realized. Taking donations for equipment that never reached American hospitals, then selling the real equipment internationally for a profit. Caroline Preston, who had been quietly working the phones with her society connections, set down her phone with a sharp click. It gets worse, she said, her voice tight. I just heard from Margot Whitfield. Her daughter's cancer treatment center? The one that supposedly received specialized equipment from our foundation? They've been using refurbished machines that were supposed to have been retired years ago. The implications hit everyone at once. Dr. Chen turned pale. If they've been using outdated equipment for cancer treatment. Get me a list of every hospital that was supposed to receive equipment, Martinez ordered. We need to check what they're actually using, what kind of treatments they've been providing. And we need to do it without causing panic, Rachel added. These hospitals are treating vulnerable patients. We can't just burst in announcing their equipment might be compromised. We handle it in phases, my father said, his business acumen kicking in. First, discrete equipment audits. Then, bring in the hospital administrators. Finally, coordinate with health authorities for any necessary patient notifications. A young FBI agent burst into the room. Detective Martinez, we've got something. From the prison. James was making calls, even after his arrest, using other inmates' phone privileges. Track every call, Martinez ordered, and get me everything you can on international medical equipment sales from the past 3 years. I watched as the team mobilized, each person tackling a different aspect of the expanding crisis. What had started as a wedding day revelation had grown into something that would affect thousands of lives across the country. Victoria, Rachel called softly. CNN is asking for an interview. They want to talk to the bride who exposed it all. No, I said firmly. This isn't about me or my wedding anymore. It's about the victims. Tell them we'll provide detailed information about the victim support hotline and the verification process for claims. The story needs to be about helping people, not about dramatic revelations. Charlotte looked up from her work with a slight smile. James would hate that. He wanted this to be about him, his cleverness, his schemes. Instead, it's becoming about people coming together to help his victims. Caroline, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. I just realized something. The Preston name has been associated with philanthropy for 3 generations. James didn't just steal money. He stole the trust people had in charitable giving itself. Then we rebuild that trust, I said, moving to the map. Every red pin, every fake charity, we replace it with real help. Legitimate organizations, transparent operations, verified results. It won't be quick, my father warned, or easy. Some of these victims have lost everything. Then we take as long as it needs, I replied. James spent years building this web of deception. We'll spend as long as it takes to make it right. Dr. Chen, who had been examining hospital records, looked up. The first step is admitting there's a problem. Thanks to James's prison bragging, we can't hide this anymore. No more cover-ups, no more protecting reputations at the expense of truth. Speaking of truth, Martinez said, returning from a phone call. James is asking to speak with you, Victoria. Says he has information about other schemes, but he'll only share it with you. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. I thought about James, sitting in his prison cell, still trying to manipulate, still trying to control the narrative. Tell him no, I said firmly. We'll find the truth ourselves, the right way. He doesn't get to play games with people's lives anymore. The next morning brought the first real test of our recovery plans. The lobby of my father's building was filled with people, cancer patients who'd been promised treatments, veterans who'd never received their prosthetics, hospital administrators discovering their equipment wasn't what they thought it was. Each person carried a story of how James's schemes had affected their lives. We need to set up interview stations, I said, watching the crowd grow. Private spaces where people can share their stories without feeling exposed. And we need counselors. This isn't just about documenting losses. It's about helping people process the betrayal. Rachel was already coordinating with local crisis counseling services. I've got 5 counselors on their way, and the veterans support groups are sending peer counselors who understand what these people are going through. Sarah had set up a secure registration system, working with FBI tech teams to ensure every claim could be properly documented and verified. We need to make this as painless as possible for the victims, she insisted. They've already been through enough. A commotion near the entrance drew our attention. A group of reporters had followed a woman inside, someone I recognized from James's prison interview broadcasts. That's Margaret Chen, Charlotte whispered. She runs the biggest cancer research foundation on the West Coast. The one James claimed was his model for our foundation's fake programs. Margaret Chen strode through the lobby, ignoring the reporter's questions. She made straight for our group, her expression fierce. Where's Caroline Preston? Caroline stepped forward, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. I'm here, Margaret. And before you say anything, yes, we know what James claimed about copying your foundation's programs. We're already working to verify which programs were real and which were fraudulent. This isn't about verification, Margaret replied. This is about the patients. Your son's interview has people questioning every cancer research program in the country. Donors are freezing funds, demanding audits. Real patients are losing access to real treatments because no one knows what to trust anymore. The gravity of this new crisis hit me. James's bragging hadn't just exposed his own crimes, it had shaken public faith in legitimate medical research programs across the country. We need to coordinate, I said, stepping forward. All the legitimate foundations, all the real research programs. We need to create a unified verification system. Complete transparency. Margaret turned to me, her expression softening slightly. You're the bride, the one who exposed it all. I'm just someone who found the truth, I replied. But right now, we need to focus on helping everyone affected by James's lies, including the legitimate organizations suffering from guilt by association. Dr. Chen joined us, carrying a stack of medical files. We've started documenting every real research program that was used as cover for James's fake ones. If we can show exactly how he manipulated legitimate work. It's not enough, Margaret interrupted. We need something bigger. A complete overhaul of how medical charities operate and report their work. New standards for transparency, independent verification, real-time tracking of funds. I can help with that, my father offered. My firm has connections with accounting oversight boards, regulatory agencies. We can work on creating new industry standards. Charlotte, who had been quietly working on her laptop, suddenly called out, "Everyone, look at this." She turned her screen to show us a social media trend that was exploding. People across the country were sharing stories of real medical charities that had helped them, real veterans programs that had changed lives. Real hope versus fake charity, Rachel read over her shoulder. It's going viral. People are fighting back against James's claims by showcasing legitimate organizations. This is what we need, I realized. Not just damage control, but a complete reimagining of how charitable work is done and verified. James wanted to destroy people's faith in giving. Let's use this crisis to make giving more trustworthy than ever. Martinez arrived with new information from the FBI's forensic team. We've traced more of the international equipment sales. The money didn't just go to James's accounts. He was working with a network of corrupt hospital administrators. People who were willing to buy cut-rate equipment without asking questions. Which means more victims, Caroline said quietly. Patients in those hospitals receiving treatment from compromised equipment. And more people we need to help, I added firmly. We're not just undoing James's schemes. We're building something better in their place. Margaret Chen watched this exchange with growing interest. You're not what I expected, she said finally. I came here ready to fight, to protect my foundation's reputation, but you're already thinking bigger than damage control. We have to, I replied. James didn't just steal money, he stole trust. The only way to fight that is with radical transparency and real change. A young woman approached our group hesitantly. She wore a hospital gown and had clearly come straight from treatment. I saw the news, she said softly. About the fake research programs. I'm in a clinical trial at Boston General, and I need to know if it's real. If the treatment I'm getting. Dr. Chen stepped forward immediately. Let's find out right now. We can verify your trial's credentials, show you the real documentation. I watched as the woman was gently led to one of our verification stations, where she could get the answers she needed. This was what it was all about. Not just exposing crimes, but helping each person affected by them. Victoria, Rachel called. The first round of counselors is here. And I've got representatives from 3 more legitimate foundations wanting to join our transparency initiative. I nodded, feeling for the first time that we were truly moving forward. James had tried to create a legacy of deception and fraud. Instead, he had inadvertently sparked a revolution in charitable giving and accountability. The transparency initiative gained momentum faster than anyone expected. By the end of the week, our command center had become the headquarters for what the media was calling the Clear Light Movement, a coalition of legitimate charities, medical institutions, and oversight organizations working to transform how charitable giving operated. 23 major foundations have signed on to the new transparency protocols, Rachel reported, updating our central database, including all the top cancer research organizations on both coasts. They're not just sharing their records, they're actively helping identify more of James's victims. Sarah, who had barely slept in days, looked up from her workstation. And we're finding them. Every legitimate foundation that joins us helps us identify more fake charities that James created to mirror their work. It's like putting together a puzzle where each piece reveals another part of the fraud. But it's also revealing something else, Charlotte added, bringing up a new set of data on the main screen. Look at these patterns. James didn't just copy legitimate charities. He studied them, found their weak points, their reporting gaps. In a twisted way, he's shown us exactly where the system was vulnerable. I watched as real-time updates flowed across our screens. New victims coming forward, new foundations joining the initiative, new protocols being implemented. What had started as exposure of one man's crimes had sparked a complete reformation of charitable oversight. "Victoria," my father called from his office. "We've got the first draft of the new verification framework. The Accounting Oversight Board fast-tracked it based on what we've learned from James's schemes. The framework was elegant in its simplicity. Real-time fund tracking, blockchain verification of donations, independent auditing requirements, and public access to all non-confidential data. Everything James had exploited in the old system was being systematically addressed." Caroline Preston entered, looking energized despite the circumstances. "The Preston Foundation Board just voted unanimously to be the first test case for the new framework. We're opening all our books, past and present, to show exactly how James manipulated the system and how we're fixing it." "That's brave," Margaret Chen commented. She had become a regular presence in our command center, bringing her foundation's expertise to the reform efforts. Most organizations want to hide their vulnerabilities. You're choosing to expose yours to help others. "The Preston name needs to stand for something different now," Caroline replied firmly. "Not just wealth and social status, but genuine transparency and accountability." A commotion near the reception area caught our attention. A group of people had arrived: cancer patients, veterans, hospital administrators, all wearing blue ribbons that had become the symbol of our movement. "They're here for the first public forum," Rachel explained. "We're streaming it live, letting real victims and real charitable organizations share their stories and their solutions." The forum was my idea, a way to take control of the narrative away from James's prison bragging and give it back to the people affected by his crimes. As I watched the participants gather, I saw something I hadn't expected: hope. "Ms. Hawthorne?" A young veteran in a wheelchair approached me. "I was supposed to receive a prosthetic leg through one of James's fake programs. But since coming here, I've been connected with a legitimate veterans organization. They're not just providing the prosthetic, they're offering real rehabilitation services, job training." "That's what this is all about," I replied, touched by his story. Not just exposing fraud, but connecting people with genuine help. Detective Martinez arrived with new information from the FBI's international investigation. The equipment trafficking network is unraveling. 3 hospital administrators in Dubai have confessed to buying stolen equipment. They're cooperating, helping us trace where else the machines went. "And the patients treated with that equipment?" Dr. Chen asked immediately. "Being contacted and offered proper screening," Martinez assured her. "The UAE Health Ministry is fully cooperating. They want to be part of the solution." Sarah called out from her station. "Breaking news from the West Coast. The California State Medical Board is adopting our verification protocols for all charitable medical programs in the state. They're citing our work here as the new gold standard." "James would hate this," Charlotte observed with a hint of satisfaction. "He thought exposing his crimes would destroy people's faith in charitable giving. Instead, it's making the whole system stronger." The public forum was about to begin. As I watched the participants take their seats, victims becoming advocates, administrators becoming reformers, foundations becoming pioneers of transparency, I felt a shift in the energy of the room. These people had all been hurt by James's schemes. but they were choosing to transform their pain into progress. "Ready for your opening remarks?" Rachel asked, handing me my notes. I looked down at the prepared speech, then set it aside. "I'm going to speak from the heart," I said, "about how exposing one man's betrayal led to thousands of people choosing to be better, to build something stronger." As I stepped up to the podium, facing not just the people in the room, but the cameras streaming our message worldwide, I realized that this was what justice really looked like. Not just punishment for crimes committed, but positive change growing from the ashes of betrayal. "Today," I began, "we're not just talking about what was stolen from us. We're talking about what we're building together, a system where trust is earned through transparency, where giving is protected by verification, and where every act of charity creates a clear light that fraud cannot hide in." 1 month after my would-be wedding day, I stood in the newly established Transparency Center, watching as real-time data flowed across the wall of screens. What had started in a crisis management room had evolved into a permanent institution dedicated to monitoring and verifying charitable activities across the country. 642 foundations have now adopted the new protocols, Sarah announced, her voice carrying a note of pride. She'd been appointed head of our technical oversight division, her experience in uncovering James's fraud making her uniquely qualified. Every day, more organizations are voluntarily opening their books. Charlotte, who had transformed from James's betrayed sister into a leading advocate for financial accountability, pulled up a new set of statistics. "Look at these donation patterns. Despite James's attempts to destroy public trust, charitable giving has actually increased. People aren't giving less, they're giving smarter. Because now they can see exactly where their money goes," my father added. He'd devoted significant resources from his investment firm to developing the tracking technology. "Every dollar can be traced from donor to end recipient. No more black boxes, no more taking things on faith." Rachel hurried in, tablet in hand. "The Senate committee just announced hearings on charitable oversight reform. They want Victoria to testify about how exposing one fraud led to systemic change." I was about to respond when a familiar face appeared at the door. Dr. Eleanor Chen, now heading our medical verification task force. "You all need to see this," she said, her expression a mix of emotions. "We just completed the first comprehensive audit of cancer research programs nationwide." The room fell silent as she brought up her findings. The data told a story none of us had expected. James's fraud actually helped us identify dozens of smaller-scale deceptions in other programs, she explained. Not huge conspiracies like his, but inefficiencies, misallocations, administrative bloat. By fixing these issues, we've managed to redirect over $100 million back into actual research. Caroline Preston, who had thrown herself into reform, efforts to redeem her family name, looked up from her own work. The Preston Foundation's new scholarship program just cleared final verification. Real students, real needs, real oversight. Everything James pretended to do, we're now actually doing. "Ms. Hawthorne?" A young intern appeared with an urgent message. "There's someone here from the Veterans Affairs Office. They say it's important." The VA representative turned out to be a retired Marine colonel named Henderson. He carried himself with military precision but had kind eyes. "I've been reviewing your work here," he said, getting straight to the point. "The way you've transformed charitable oversight. We want to implement similar protocols for all veteran service organizations." "That's a massive undertaking," I cautioned. "The veterans services sector is huge." "And rife with opportunities for fraud," he finished. James Preston wasn't the first to exploit veterans, and he won't be the last. But your transparency protocols could help us prevent future scams. As if to underscore his point, Detective Martinez chose that moment to deliver her latest update. We've identified another network of fake veterans charities in the Midwest, not connected to James but using similar methods. The difference is, thanks to your new verification system, we caught it before they could do serious damage. The implications were clear. The reforms we'd implemented weren't just cleaning up James's mess, they were preventing new frauds from taking root. "Victoria," Rachel called softly. "The media's here for the monthly briefing. They're asking about James again. He's given another interview from prison." "Let me guess," I said wearily. "Still bragging about how clever his schemes were?" "Actually, no," Rachel replied, looking surprised. "He's complaining that no one's talking about him anymore. All the coverage is about the reforms, the improvements, the lives being helped. He's becoming a footnote in his own story." A small smile crossed Charlotte's face. That's the worst punishment for James. Not prison time or asset seizure, but irrelevance. Everything he did to make himself seem brilliant and powerful is being overshadowed by positive change, Sarah called out from her monitoring station. "Another major foundation just applied for verification status, and 3 international charitable organizations want to adopt our protocols. The Clear Light movement is going global," Margaret Chen remarked. She'd flown in from California for our monthly coordination meeting. "What started as one bride exposing one fraud is becoming an international standard for charitable accountability." I watched as more data flowed across our screens, funds being properly allocated, research being properly verified, help reaching people who truly needed it. Each data point represented a life touched, a wrong being righted, a system being improved. "Colonel Henderson," I said, turning back to the VA representative, "let's talk about implementing these protocols for veterans services. But we do it right, with input from veterans themselves, from service organizations, from everyone who has a stake in making the system work." As we moved to the conference room to begin planning, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the quay window. I was still wearing the simple gold necklace that had been my grandmother's, my something old from that wedding day that never was. But instead of reminding me of what I'd lost, it now reminded me of what had been gained, not just exposed truth, but positive change that would help people for years to come. 6 weeks after my canceled wedding, I found myself standing in the United Nations headquarters in New York, preparing to address an international conference on charitable oversight. The same determination that had driven me to expose James's fraud on my wedding day now fueled a global mission for transparency. "Representatives from 32 countries," Rachel whispered, adjusting my microphone. She'd evolved from bridesmaid to global communications director, coordinating our message across continents. Plus major international aid organizations, global health initiatives. "And they all want to know how one local fraud case led to a worldwide reform movement," Sarah added. She'd flown in from London, where she'd been helping implement our verification systems across European charitable organizations. "The ripple effects are staggering." Charlotte joined us, fresh from a series of meetings with international banking regulators. "We've identified similar fraud patterns in charitable organizations across 4 continents. Not as extensive as James's network, but using the same vulnerabilities in the system." "Which is exactly why we're here," I replied, reviewing my notes one last time. "Every fraud we expose, every weakness we find, helps us build stronger protections." Detective Martinez, now heading an international task force on charitable fraud, arrived with urgent news. "The World Health Organization just signed on to our protocols. They're implementing our verification system for all their global health initiatives." The implications were enormous. The WHO's adoption of our standards would affect healthcare delivery in developing nations worldwide. What had started as exposing one man's betrayal was now transforming how humanitarian aid was managed globally. "Ms. Hawthorne?" A UN official appeared. "Secretary General Watson would like a word before your address." In a private meeting room, The Secretary General, a dignified woman with steel gray hair, got straight to the point. Your transparency initiative has exposed something we've long suspected but couldn't prove. Systematic fraud in international aid distribution. The protocols you developed for tracking James Preston's crimes. They're exactly what we need. On a global scale. We're finding that fraud doesn't stop at borders, I replied. When we started tracking James's international equipment sales, we uncovered entire networks of corruption in medical supply chains. Precisely, she nodded. And that's why we've convened this conference. We need your expertise, your systems, your experience in converting crisis into reform. Dr. Chen, who had been quietly documenting international medical equipment fraud, spoke up from where she'd been reviewing data. We've already seen results. Since implementing the Clear Light protocols in European medical charities, we've recovered over $200 million in misappropriated funds. That money is now being properly directed to patient care. Caroline Preston entered, her elegant appearance belying her fierce dedication to reform. She'd been working with international society figures, leveraging old social connections to promote transparency and global philanthropy. The European Union is considering legislation, she announced, making our verification protocols mandatory for all charitable organizations operating within their jurisdiction. A commotion outside drew our attention. Through the glass walls, we could see a group of people gathering, representatives from international aid organizations, all wearing the blue ribbons that had become our movement's symbol. They're here for the afternoon session, Rachel explained. Aid workers from crisis zones worldwide. They've been dealing with fraud and corruption for years, but now they have tools to fight it. Sarah's tablet chimed with an urgent update. Breaking news from Asia. The major Buddhist charitable organizations are adopting our protocols. They're calling it the Path of Clear Light, linking our transparency movement to traditional values of honesty and compassion. The symbolism wasn't lost on any of us. What had begun as exposing a personal betrayal had resonated with universal values across cultures. Victoria, Charlotte called softly. There's something else you should see. She pulled up a news feed on her laptop. James gave another interview. I waited for the familiar surge of anger, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt a strange sense of pity as I watched my former fiancé, still trying to maintain his image of cleverness from behind prison walls. He's claiming he meant for this to happen, Rachel said, reading the transcript. Says he deliberately left trails to expose weaknesses in the system. That he's the real catalyst for reform. Let him claim what he wants, I replied. The truth is in the results. Real people getting real help, real organizations operating with real transparency. His motives don't matter anymore. The UN official reappeared. Ms. Hawthorne, they're ready for you in the main assembly. As I walked toward the podium, I thought about how far we'd come from that summer day in Boston. The wedding dress was now in an evidence locker. The cathedral where James's crimes were exposed was just another place of worship, but the movement that began there had taken on a life of its own. Looking out at the assembled delegates, representatives from nations rich and poor, from organizations large and small, all united in the pursuit of transparent charitable giving, I realized that this was what real justice looked like. Not just punishing one man's crimes, but transforming the systems that made those crimes possible. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady. We gather here not to discuss a single fraud case, but to seize an opportunity for global change. What we learned from exposing one man's betrayal has given us the tools to protect millions of vulnerable people worldwide. The clear light of transparency knows no borders, and neither should our commitment to reform. 2 months after the UN conference, the Transparency Center had become a hub of global reform. What began in a crisis management room now occupied an entire floor of a downtown Boston office building, with satellite offices opening in London, Singapore, and Geneva. On this particular morning, I stood watching teams of international coordinators, tracking charitable activities across time zones. The numbers just came in from the Asian Pacific region, Sarah announced, bringing up a holographic display that showed real-time fund tracking across continents. Verified charitable giving has increased by 300% since implementing our protocols. People trust the system now that they can see exactly where their donations go. Charlotte, who had just returned from establishing our European Oversight Division, added another layer to the display. Look at this pattern, she pointed to a cluster of data points. Every time we implement verification in a new region, we first uncover fraud, then see a surge in legitimate giving. It's like cleaning out an infection before healing can begin. Ms. Hawthorne? A young analyst approached with urgency. We've got something unusual from the African deployment. The tracking system flagged a pattern similar to James's medical equipment scheme. My heart tightened, not from pain anymore, but from determination. Show me. The analyst pulled up a complex web of transactions. Someone was trying to divert medical supplies meant for rural clinics. But here's the thing. The system caught it before any equipment was actually moved. The clear light protocols worked exactly as designed. Rachel appeared with her tablet, already coordinating with international media. This is perfect timing. We've got journalists asking for success stories, concrete examples of how the reforms are preventing fraud, not just exposing it. Dr. Chen, who now led our Global Medical Verification Task Force, joined the discussion. It's not just prevention. The system is actually improving healthcare delivery. When donors can see exactly how their money is used, they're more likely to support less visible but crucial needs: infrastructure, training, maintenance. A familiar face appeared at the door. Margaret Chen, fresh from establishing our West Coast operations. Victoria, you need to see this. The International Red Cross just released their first quarterly report using our full transparency protocols. The report was extraordinary. Every dollar, every supply, every service could be traced from donor to recipient. Real-time updates showed exactly how aid was being distributed in crisis zones. The level of detail was unprecedented. This is what James never understood, Caroline Preston observed. She'd been quietly watching the operations, her aristocratic bearing now tempered with genuine purpose. He saw charity as a weakness to exploit. He never imagined it could become a strength through transparency. Detective Martinez arrived with updates from Interpol. We're seeing a dramatic drop in charitable fraud worldwide. The criminal networks that used to target aid organizations are finding it impossible to operate under the new protocols. Because there's nowhere to hide anymore, my father added. He'd been instrumental in getting the global financial sector to adopt our verification standards. Every transaction leaves a clear trail. The same technology that traces legitimate aid makes fraud immediately visible. A commotion near the international desk caught our attention. The WHO coordinator was receiving urgent updates from Geneva. They're expanding the protocols, she announced excitedly. Not just for medical aid, but for all UN humanitarian operations. The Security Council just approved it unanimously. I watched as the implications rippled through the room. The UN's adoption meant our transparency standards would now affect every major humanitarian operation worldwide. Victoria, Rachel called softly. The prison called. James is asking again to speak with you. He says he's seen the news about the UN adoption. No, I said firmly. He's not part of this story anymore. This is about something much bigger than his crimes or my wedding day. Sarah's system pinged with new alerts. More organizations applying for verification status. Religious charities, educational foundations, environmental groups. They're not being forced to adopt the protocols. They're choosing to. Because transparency works, Charlotte concluded. It builds trust, increases donations, improves efficiency. Everything James tried to destroy, we've made stronger. Colonel Henderson from the VA appeared with his own update. The Military Charities Verification Program is exceeding all expectations. Not a single case of fraud since implementation. And veteran services are actually improving because we can see exactly what needs aren't being met. The afternoon brought a delegation from international disaster relief organizations. They'd been among the most skeptical of our protocols, concerned that verification requirements might slow emergency response times. We were wrong, their spokesperson admitted. The transparency system isn't slowing us down. It's making us more effective. Donors can see exactly what's needed in real time. Aid gets where it's needed faster because there's no more waste or diversion. As I watched these dedicated professionals working across languages and time zones, I thought about the strange alchemy that had transformed personal betrayal into global reform. The wedding day that never was had given birth to something far more meaningful than a marriage certificate. Ms. Hawthorne? An intern appeared with breaking news. They're announcing the Nobel Peace Prize nominations tomorrow. The Clear Light movement is on the short list. That's not why we do this, I replied, turning back to the global operations display. Every time the system stops a fraud, every time it helps aid reach someone in need, that's what matters. The clear light of transparency was spreading, not just exposing darkness but creating something new. A world where charity could fulfill its truest purpose, unhindered by fraud or fear. 3 months to the day after what should have been my wedding, I stood in the garden of St. Michael's Cathedral. The summer flowers were fading now, giving way to autumn's first blush. The church looked different in the soft September light. No longer the site of personal betrayal, but a reminder of how truth, once exposed, could light the way forward. It feels strange being back here, Rachel said softly, joining me on the stone path. My best friend had stood by me through everything, from wedding preparations to worldwide reform. Hard to believe it's only been 3 months. Sometimes, it feels like years, I replied, touching the aged stone of the cathedral wall. Other times, it feels like yesterday. Charlotte appeared, carrying files from our latest international coordination meeting. The final numbers are in from the global audit. Want to know how much fraud the Clearlight protocols have prevented in 3 months? Before she could share the figures, Sarah rushed out of the church where she'd been setting up for tomorrow's International Charitable Oversight Conference. You all need to see this. James just released a statement through his lawyers. My stomach didn't clench anymore at the mention of his name. The man who had nearly become my husband was now little, more than a cautionary tale. His attempts at manipulation rendered powerless by the very systems his crimes had inspired us to create. He's finally admitting everything. Sarah continued reading from her tablet. Not just the fraud schemes we already uncovered, but dozens more we hadn't found yet. Says he wants to contribute to the transparency movement he inadvertently inspired. Caroline Preston emerged from the cathedral, where she'd been arranging chairs for tomorrow's conference. The past 3 months had transformed her from a society matron concerned with appearances into a fierce advocate for accountability. Let me guess, she said, her voice carrying a new strength. He's trying to make himself relevant again, to claim credit for the reforms that exposed him. Actually, Detective Martinez interrupted, joining our group with her own update. I think he finally realized he can't fight the tide anymore. The movement has grown beyond anything he could have imagined. His own lawyer told him to come clean because the transparency protocols would reveal everything eventually anyway. I looked around at these women who had become so much more than colleagues. Each of us had been transformed by the events that began in this church 3 months ago. Rachel, from bridesmaid to global communications strategist. Charlotte, from betrayed sister to international reform leader. Sarah, from accountant to architect of worldwide verification systems. Caroline, from social pillar to champion of charitable accountability. Dr. Chen arrived with Margaret, both carrying reports from the latest medical aid verification summit. "Remember how we worried that transparency requirements might slow down emergency response?" Margaret asked. "The opposite happened. When everyone can see exactly what's needed where, aid actually moves faster." "Victoria," my father called, approaching with a distinguished group: UN officials, international banking regulators, and humanitarian organization leaders. They'd all flown in for tomorrow's conference. "They want to hear the story again, from the beginning." I looked at the assembled group, these powerful figures who had gathered because of what started here. "The story isn't really about me," I began, "or even about James and his crimes. It's about what happens when people choose truth over comfort, transparency over tradition." "But it started with your choice," one of the UN officials pressed. "On your wedding day, when you could have kept quiet, protected yourself from scandal." "There was no choice," I interrupted gently. "Not really. When you see something wrong, something that's hurting people who trusted you, staying silent makes you part of the problem." Rachel touched my arm. "Show them," she suggested quietly. I led the group inside the cathedral, where preparations for tomorrow's conference were nearly complete. The space that had once been decorated for a wedding was now set up for something far more meaningful. Screens showed real-time charitable aid tracking across the globe. Workstations connected verification teams on every continent. The altar area had been transformed into a central command center for worldwide transparency operations. "This is what rose from the ashes of one exposed fraud," I explained. "Not just oversight, but a complete transformation in how we think about trust and verification. Every donation traced, every promise kept, every bit of aid tracked from giver to receiver." Charlotte's phone buzzed with another update. "The World Bank just adopted our protocols for all development aid. It's becoming the global standard." "Because it works," Sarah added. "Fraud rates dropping, donation rates rising, aid delivery improving. The numbers tell the story." As the afternoon light filtered through the stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across our global tracking displays, I thought about the young bride I'd been 3 months ago. Standing in this same space, heart pounding, clutching a bouquet with a hidden USB drive, about to expose a betrayal that would change everything. "The Clear Light Movement," one of the international officials mused. "Named for this moment, when you first brought the truth to light?" "Named for what we learned," I corrected. "That transparency isn't just about exposing wrongdoing. It's about creating systems so clear, so visible, that wrongdoing has nowhere to hide. When everything is in the clear light, trust can finally flourish." Rachel checked her watch. "The global coordination call starts in 10 minutes. Representatives from 8 time zones waiting to report on their verification processes." We moved toward the conference setup. I paused for one last look at the cathedral space. The place where I'd lost a future I thought I wanted, only to find a purpose I never could have imagined. Sometimes, I realized, the greatest gifts come, disguised as betrayals. You just have to be brave enough to bring them into the light. The morning of the international conference dawned clear and bright. As I prepared my keynote address in what had once been the cathedral's bridal suite, I couldn't help but appreciate life's strange symmetry. 3 months ago, I'd stood in this same room preparing to expose a betrayal. Now I was preparing to share how that exposure had sparked a global revolution in charitable giving. "The first delegates are arriving," Rachel announced, poking her head in. "Including someone you might want to meet, Maria Santos from Brazil. She used our protocols to expose a similar fraud in South America." "Another bride?" I asked, somehow knowing the answer. "Another woman who chose truth over silence," Rachel corrected. "She was an accountant at a children's charity, found discrepancies just like Sarah did. But instead of staying quiet, she remembered our story and came forward." Sarah herself arrived with the latest global impact reports. "It's not just Maria. We're seeing a pattern. People who might have stayed silent before are speaking up. They're calling it the Hawthorne effect, when one person's courage inspires others to expose wrongdoing. Charlotte joined us, tablet in hand. James's full confession is making waves, not because of what he did. We'd already found most of it, but because of what he's revealing about how he chose his targets, the psychology of fraud, which is helping us prevent future schemes, Detective Martinez added, entering with her own updates. His testimony is actually helping us strengthen the verification systems. Every weakness he exploited becomes another point we can protect. The cathedral's bells began to toll, marking the hour. Through the window, I could see more delegates. Arriving, charity administrators, oversight officials, reform advocates from every corner of the globe. Each carried their own story of how the Clear Light movement had transformed their work. "Victoria," my father called from the doorway. "The UN Secretary-General is here early. She wants to discuss expanding the protocols to include disaster relief coordination." As we walked through the cathedral's corridors, now humming with international conversations in dozens of languages, Caroline Preston fell into step beside us. "I just got word from the Preston Foundation's new board. The restructured organization has already helped more people in 3 months than the old foundation did in 3 years. Because every dollar goes where it's supposed to," Dr. Chen added, joining our group. The transparency requirements actually made charitable giving more efficient. When there's no waste, no fraud, no diversion of funds. "The help reaches those who need it most," Margaret Chen finished. She'd flown in from California to share how the West Coast implementation was revolutionizing medical research funding. We entered the main cathedral space, now transformed into an international conference center. The altar area housed a state-of-the-art command center, monitoring charitable activities worldwide. The pews had been replaced with workstations where verification teams could coordinate across time zones. Screens lined the walls, showing real-time aid distribution and fraud prevention statistics. Maria Santos approached, her eyes bright with purpose. "Ms. Hawthorne," she said in accented English, "your story gave me courage. When I found the fraud in my organization, I thought about you. About how one person's truth can change everything." Before I could respond, Sarah called out from her monitoring station. "New numbers coming in. Global charitable giving has increased by 500% since implementation of the protocols, and fraud attempts are down 92%. Because there's nowhere to hide anymore," Charlotte observed. "The same technology that tracks legitimate aid makes fraud impossible to conceal." Rachel appeared with more updates. As this news sank in, Maria Santos joined us, her eyes bright with purpose. "It's not just the big organizations," she said. "Small charities, local foundations, they're all choosing to adopt the protocols. Not because they have to, but because transparency builds trust, and trust changes everything." The cathedral's bells began to toll, marking the end of the day. The same bells that had once been meant to celebrate my wedding now seemed to be celebrating something far more meaningful: the triumph of truth over deception, of transparency over fraud, of collective good over personal gain. "Ms. Hawthorne?" A young woman approached nervously. "I'm from the National Archives. We'd like to preserve the USB drive, the one from your bouquet, as a symbol of how one person's courage can change the world." I smiled, remembering the weight of that drive hidden among the flowers, the weight of truth waiting to be revealed. "The drive belongs in a museum," I agreed. "But the real legacy isn't in the evidence it contained. It's in what people chose to do with the truth once it was exposed." Rachel checked her phone one last time. "Final update from the prison. James saw the conference coverage. His lawyer says he finally understands. He's not the mastermind of some brilliant scheme anymore. He's just a cautionary tale in a much bigger story of positive change." The last delegates began to leave, I found myself standing in the exact spot where I should have said my wedding vows 3 months ago. The pain of that betrayal had faded, replaced by something stronger. The knowledge that choosing truth, no matter how difficult, can catalyze transformation far beyond personal justice. You know, Charlotte said softly, when you exposed James's crimes that day, you didn't just stop a fraud. You started a movement that's helping millions of people worldwide. We all did, I corrected her, looking around at the remarkable group of women who had turned personal pain into global change. Every person who chose to join the fight for transparency, every whistleblower who found the courage to speak up, every organization that chose verification over blind trust, we built this together. Sarah's global monitoring system pinged, one last time. Look at this, she called. Real-time aid delivery tracking shows more people received verified charitable assistance today than in any previous day in recorded history. The system works. It really works. As twilight deepened outside the cathedral windows, I thought about the bride I'd been 3 months ago. Heart racing, hands shaking, about to expose a truth that would change everything. I couldn't have known then that exposing one man's betrayal would lead to a worldwide movement for transparency and accountability. Ready to go? Rachel asked softly. Tomorrow's another big day. The Clear Light Institute launches its global operations. Just one moment, I replied, taking a final look around the cathedral. The space that had witnessed my deepest betrayal had also witnessed the birth of something extraordinary. A movement that proved truth, once exposed to clear light, has the power to transform not just individual lives, but the very way human beings help one another. As we walked out into the gathering dusk, the cathedral bells tolled one final time, but they no longer sounded like an echo of what was lost. Instead, they rang out like a celebration of what had been found, the power of truth to light the way forward, the strength of transparency to build trust, and the ability of one person's courage to inspire positive change around the world. The bride who had walked into this cathedral 3 months ago, planning to expose a betrayal, had no idea she was actually starting a global revolution in charitable giving. But sometimes I realized the greatest victories come not from what we plan, but from what we choose to do when those plans fall apart.